Hey everybody, welcome back to your favorite series here on Backlog Banter, Blue Blur Banter, because we're talking about my boy, Sonic the Hedgehog, because today we're going to talk about Sonic Superstars. But before we do, if you want to talk to us about Sonic, or anything else, maybe better games, you can join the Discord link as usual, top of the description or down there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, leave a comment about how we're wrong about Sonic Superstars. I'm just preempting the video here,
Sure.
just so you know, Sonic fans, as you migrate from DeviantArt to this video or wherever you've been. We've got a lot of critical things to say about Sonic Superstars, but it comes from, at least on this side of the video, a place of great love, because Sonic is my child. But Sonic Superstars didn't quite hit for me, and that's really what we're here to talk about today. So Tucker, let's get into it. Start me off by giving me your high level 40,000 feet from the wing of Tails biplane impressions of Sonic Superstars.
Sonic Superstars.
Developed by RZest.
That's a great point.
The famed
Yep.
team RZest.
Another feather in their cap. They got a lot of feathers in there. No one wants those feathers. No one likes those feathers. And I didn't like Sonic Superstars. I was reasonably interested in this game. I think that, as with everyone, seeing how good Sonic Mania was, and it being ostensibly the only real 2D Sonic in the last 15 years, that gets us kind of excited. Like, okay, they kind of know what might happen. But while I was excited for Superstars to see what another modern 2D Sonic could be, and some of the ideas and the visuals look kind of interesting from the trailers, this game moves the series forward in ways, but stops all of that momentum by also being a poorly designed video game. There are ideas in here that are like, okay, sure, that's new for this series. That could be implemented in interesting ways. But then about halfway through the game, you don't stub your toe, you break your fucking leg, and then you gotta limp to the end. I think this is a tale of two Sonics. I think there is one half of this game that is a pretty solid Sonic 2D platformer that I was actually having a good amount of fun with some interesting ideas. But then there's also the worst parts of Sonic. And I think the game stands as a unique encapsulation of some of the most fun I've had with Sonic and some of the least fun I've had with Sonic.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't finish the game, and that's important context.
Yeah.
I tapped out at Cyber Station.
That's like 1.5 stages before the end, though, so...
It's very close to the end of the game, but people keep telling me that final boss is just a pain in the ass. It was right before Mario Wonder was coming out, and
No. Yeah, why would you?
I've reached my limit here.
Absolutely.
I've reached my limit. Now, if in case people are coming in here new, I love particularly 2D Sonic. There's a couple of 3D games like Generations that I really love also, but for the most part, my love of... I actually do like Forces in some perverted way. My love of Sonic really is the 2D games, and we have seen the 2D games be pretty smartly modernized at various points in time. Sonic Advance is a really great game. Sonic Advance 1.
I like Sonic Advance. It's okay, pretty good game.
And then Sonic Dash is also quite interesting. Or sorry, Sonic Rush. Sonic Dash is a mobile game. Sonic Rush.
How
Sonic Rush
could
Adventure.
you possibly get those mixed up?
I apologize. Sonic Colors on DS. Sure. We've seen various teams come in, Dimps in particular, grab a hold of Sonic, work with Sonic Team, figure out ways to evolve the series, and kind of stay in lockstep with the modern games. Yeah. That's really what the adventure and rush games are in large part. And it's to varying degrees successful. Sonic Superstars is not that.
Yeah.
Sonic Superstars is very clearly much more interested in a almost kind of new Super Mario Brothers fashion, Donkey Kong Country Returns fashion, going back to the well of Genesis Sonic and modernizing it through that lens. Instead of trying to find parity with where Sonic is going with Frontiers, instead of trying to introduce a lot of new ideas, it is literally a modern take on the Genesis games. But as you said, Sonic Mania got there first, and Sonic Mania did it a lot better. There's just a much higher level of finesse in that game. Absolutely. Partially because it is a lot more faithful to the design philosophies of the Genesis games than Sonic Superstars is, even though Sonic Superstars is so very clearly trying to position itself almost entirely
Yeah.
on nostalgia. There's a lot of boss design philosophy here that is very much out of things like Rush and really does not work. But I think that the ultimate sin and the ultimate difference between Mania and Superstars, aside from the aesthetics, is that the execution of level design
Yeah.
concepts is nowhere near as
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
in Superstars in the back half of the game. And to the contrary, there's a lot of one-off ideas introduced, and they just don't
Yeah.
really work.
They
I
are
think that
introduced. They are not carried through.
right,
They are not brought to conclusions. They're not tied up with a pretty little bow. They give you the idea for an idea, and you're like, hey,
right.
I bet that could be fun. And then you realize after you've been playing for 2 hours, what happened to that idea?
And that's really my problem with Sonic Superstars in a nutshell. This is not me saying that Sonic is an outdated franchise. Tucker might disagree with that, but for me, I do
I don't
believe
think
that
that,
there
by the way.
is.
I think there's potential.
Yeah, I think there's been plenty of illustration in a 2D space how you can move Sonic forward, and in the case of Mania, how you can look back but still be very modern and very sleek.
Sure.
And I just don't think that Sonic Superstars is that. I think that it is a game that clearly needed more time to be iterated on, and frankly needed to be given to a different team. I just
Yeah.
don't think that what we got in Sonic Superstars is especially surprising when you look at the games that RSS has made in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's definitely true.
Yeah. Yoshi's New Island, Hey Pikmin, Batland, right? They worked on Batland.
So, yeah.
They're the Batland team. So I just think that, and I do have some praise of the game that I want to talk about. There is a really solid foundation here. I just think that when you're making such a straightforward platformer, it's really going to live or die by the level design, and I just don't think the level design, at a certain point, I think probably after the Sand stage, Sand Sanctuary, I believe is the name. After Sand Sanctuary, the game just totally changes, and I think it just changes for the worse.
Yeah. So, do you want to start with the positives or the negatives for this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can start with the positives because I think that they're apparent kind of from the jump. Yeah. I mean, what do you think about sort of the presentation and animation of the game?
I'm conflicted because I think that this game has really good use of color. I think that the way that the levels are very saturated, and they use a lot of interesting background to sort of juxtapose things. The second act of what's the first level? Bridge Island Zone, I believe. Second act of Bridge Island is like set during the evening, and like the sun's going down. It's like, oh, that's really interesting. Like it gives the level a new flavor. I think that the visual color palette is pretty good, and the design of these levels is good. I don't think it's exceptional, but I think it does pretty good with the 3D visuals. But the unfortunate part is that, and this brings in a negative earlier than intended, but
fair enough.
I don't think this game looks very good on Switch. And playing it especially on a big screen, this game is very jaggy. It is very choppy in terms of the frame rate, and it takes the reasonably good character models and environment models and just kind of like waters them down through this sort of like jaggy, low poly element, which is just the fact that it's on Switch, because there is a much better looking, much better running version available on other platforms. And putting them side by side, I was pretty stunned because it doesn't look amazing on the other systems, but the fact that they had to water it down so much to get it on Switch is like whatever portion of the team had to make it run on Switch clearly didn't put the same amount of work to bring it up to parity, where I think it could have been. Because I think this is a decent looking game in concept, but the Switch and its power really held it back from me, like truly enjoying these visuals. Instead, I was like, oh man, that background thing is like really low poly, and oh man, look at how jagged the environment is looking at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I played the game in Switch handheld mode. I just don't care about that stuff, frankly. It's seldom the case where I'm playing something on Switch and I'm like investigating the textures all that closely, because you're totally right, especially when you're looking at the PlayStation 5 version of the game, for instance. There is a massive difference. I mean, the playability for me wasn't really an issue. I know that apparently the last fight is especially egregious on Switch. Obviously, I didn't get there. I think the reason that I wanted to start here is because I'm actually very impressed with the art direction of the game.
Okay.
The execution of the port is
Yeah.
really a different conversation ultimately, I think. When you go back and you play like the Sonic Genesis games and you play Mania, there's a real sense of expression and fluidity to the way that Sonic
Yeah.
moves that I don't think is really that well captured by the sort of classic Sonic that we see in Generations or Forces. Um, so I really like how he's depicted here. Just when you sort of watch him get hit, when you watch him run, when he teeters on an edge, I think that the animation is actually really good. And you're right, the use of color I think is really special in that this is the super vibrant and saturated Sonic world that Sonic has always been. So I really enjoyed
Not
just
secret rings,
being in the world. Yeah, not right. Well, that's more gritty. That's more your that's more like your edgy Sonic, right? That's the Sonic for a more refined palette.
Twirling my mustache.
A literary palette, you could even say. It's a very literary game. But
yeah, no, the color's good, and I just honestly wish that I played this game on the higher power systems because while I do agree in concept, I did take issue with some elements of the port, and they held it back from me, like being like, "Oh man, I'm really appreciating these visuals." And the frame rate is something that I think I more have an issue with, because as I was talking to a few people were like, "Oh yeah, they had to really knock it down so it ran at a consistent frame rate on Switch." I'm like, "Well, it doesn't. This is a very choppy game, and when there's like too many enemies on screen, it's like I'm fucking playing Mario 3, or like things are like going gaga, and I'm like, no, hold on, or like Mega Man, where like, and on NES, and I haven't had that happen in many modern games, and so having a game that is supposed to be modern and fluid, the frame rate really, really killed that experience for me because it's fine in most places, but it is inconsistent, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. Again, it just comes down to the fact that for me that I don't give a fuck. I don't notice. I don't care. I am one of the last holdouts in that I can't tell between 30 and 60 frames battalion. So take my opinion with a grain of salt. I think you have the more accurate assessment of the technical fidelity of the port. I think I'm just sort of more so captivated by how it depicts the world in this really lush, cartoony way, just because part of what's always attracted me to Sonic is just the world and the characters and the interesting sense of place that's cultivated in across his universe and its various games. So I really like that, and I also think, kind of speaking to fundamental things the game does really right, I think that the game's physics are very good. And ultimately this is pivotal, right? If we want to talk about things that make a platformer work or not work, physics and level design are probably the things you must need to most nail. Now, again, as I said, I feel like Sonic Superstars only ends up succeeding with one of those pillars, but and that's why it comes down to sort of executional issue for me, because the bones are very good. Sonic feels very good to control. Amy feels very good to control. Those are the only two characters I ended up playing in my time. But I really enjoyed how they both felt, and it's because of that that I do feel like I will at some point return to this game and just see it through. I just feel like I have to, because again, I do love Sonic, and I do feel like the things here that are the springboard for a great game, the world cultivated, the way it feels to play are here. It is just that second half, but I do want to make sure I specify, as we're getting deeper into this, that the game does feel good, and there is a lot of concern that it wouldn't, because obviously Forces does not feel very good levels, in its 2D sections.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is I don't have any specific like super praise in that area, because frankly I've really only played 2D Sonic games that felt about this way, like Sonic 1 through 3, and I guess CD might feel a little bit different, but not like terribly different. And then Mania, and then this, other than Forces 2D levels, which are not good for other reasons as well. The physics are good in this game. And I think that helps start the game on a good foot. When you are starting off in Bridge Island Zone, and frankly, that's the best use of color in the game, and you're just getting used to the physics, and you're zipping around this level that frankly is pretty well designed, and I'm really liking the way that the blues and greens and whites instead of browns are bringing out a different color
Right.
palette for this first level. The game starts off on a pretty strong foot, and I would say the first 4 or 5 zones are some of the most smooth fun I've had with Sonic in a long time. There's some boss fights or mini
Yeah.
bosses in there that kind of break that up a little bit, but they're not they're nothing I haven't experienced in Sonic before, because Sonic has always had pretty poor boss fights, or at least very inconsistent boss fights. And so I like how this game starts. And when I was talking to this game about this game the first time, I was like, Abram, I'm having fun with a 2D Sonic game. Like I was worried that something that was going wrong with myself, but I think it's just really that
Yeah.
those first few levels are just super playable and vibrant. And as I want to get into a little more specifically, I think there's some fun level gimmicks and mechanics in there that keep them feeling very distinct and fresh. Yeah, the way the game starts, I was feeling very comfortable with, and the physics are a big part of that.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing about it, for as much as we can kind of deride the level design in the second half, and we're going to, I think that the best levels of this game do strike a really good balance between more methodical platforming and some really solid
Yeah,
speed
absolutely
sections.
do. Yeah.
I think that the tempo here is extremely effective. And because the physics feel good and you have the confidence to make these more quote unquote precise,
Yeah.
or let's say just say comparatively precise platforming decisions, it does feel good. I don't really ever feel like I'm on the back foot. I think that they know when to push down the gas and release a little bit.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
again, that is a really critical thing. And there are, again, as you get deeper, a lot more horseshit, random, insta kill, off screen spike nonsense
Yeah.
things.
There's
But
basically none of that in that first half of the game, and I think that might
no,
be
yeah,
why I felt that I had so much more fun with those first few stages.
yeah,
It's interesting to see where they add those into the second half of the game, and then it drastically changes the way that flow feels. But part of the reason that I always felt it frustrating to get into Sonic is I felt like the game was always putting roadblocks in front of me to getting to where the fun was, loving the physics, hopping
yeah.
between paths. But the first few worlds, zones of Sonic Superstars, I think stay away from the bullshit enough to where I was able to really just appreciate the physics and move through them at a really like comfortable clip. I wasn't dying too
Yeah.
much. I wasn't being stopped. I wasn't having spikes or enemies come off out at me from off the stage. It was enjoyable, and that I feel is something that they more consistently did throughout the games in the Genesis era ones, where for whatever reason the second or third zone is going to have some bullshit stuff that's like spikes are going to come out at you, but they really do not do that in like the first half of this game.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first half of the game reminds me of Mania, sort of in the way that, because I do replay Mania quite regularly. Mania, for the most part, with a couple key exceptions, like the last zone in Mania, which I don't like, and a couple other very particular hazards, the game is quite frictionless when you start to get into it. And it's possible that the more you play Sonic Superstars, it gets into a similar tempo in the later parts of the game too. But for me, what I think Mania understands quite acutely is that kind of the fun comes from my perspective, and why that game is so replayable. The fun comes from improving your maneuvering through the stages, opposed to having to really stop and grapple with particular challenges. Sonic ends up being in part a game of memorization, and then paying off the memorization by being more nimble as you go. And I think you're able to do that in the first half of the game, but then it starts to really slow you down, and I think that's the issue. You start to become slowed down by set pieces, level gimmicks, boss fights that are just not, in my opinion, polished enough in their execution to be satisfying.
No, absolutely. Especially because I usually end up going against the physics and the fluidity that is the draw for those first few worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I think... So there is one issue I do have that makes itself apparent immediately, which I think is one of the areas where I feel like this game does not feel hyper premium. The zone transitions are really not that effective here.
They're basically non-existent.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also I think the technical issue I notice most on Switch is the extreme
Yeah,
load times
yeah.
between zones.
And also,
But
not that this actually matters, but there's like
yeah,
freezing in the loading screens. It's like, what the fuck?
yeah, I mean, I played a couple times and interviewed the dev of, and people should, if they haven't, go play it. And we can actually leave a link to it in the description. The fan game Sonic Triple Trouble
Yeah.
16-bit is, in my opinion, among the best Sonic games ever
Mhm.
created. And one of the things that makes Noah Copeland's take on Triple Trouble and take on Sonic so interesting is, as they told me, God of War is a big
Yeah.
inspiration for their game,
February
actually.
2018.
In that, yeah, in that there are no real cuts. There's a very contiguous sense of motion
Mhm.
between zones, and that lends Triple Triple 16-bit to this very sophisticated and premium sense of adventure that I think Sonic Superstars very often
Sure.
mediates. Now, sometimes Fang will show up, sometimes something's going to happen that's going to kind of prompt you into the next act or zone or whatever, but it's not a particularly fluid. And the cutscenes that are often these sort of oddly pantomimed little
Yeah.
vignettes just don't really communicate to me a premium sense of
Absolutely
storytelling.
not.
And I don't, yeah, and I don't think you had to do Sonic CD style fully animated cutscenes or fully voiced exchanges like in the DS Sonic
Yeah.
games to convey a sense of storytelling. As Triple Trouble 16-bit shows, you can convey that entirely through gameplay. So pretty early on, even though I think that the actual sense of the world and animation are great, I don't think that it stitches everything
Yeah.
together in a really natural way, which I
Yeah.
missed.
No, absolutely.
The other,
Well,
yeah,
I just want to talk about
I'm,
those
yeah,
interstitial cutscenes real quick, which are
yeah,
mostly Fang, Trip, and Eggman kind of like doing some shit. Not that
right,
I expected much out of story or character from this game, but I think that, frankly, the very simple fact of not that there's not voice acting, but there's not even like Animal Crossing, Banjo Kazooie, Star Fox style
yeah,
Bebop nonsense over them like waving their hands or jumping up and down makes it feel really cheap and rushed. I mean, not only are these things like 30 seconds long and basically nothing happens, they're kind of just like little prank things in between. They're like jumping and down, up and down in like these canned animations, and there's no sound effects whatsoever. And it's like, huh, you could. There's not even them going, ah, whoa, hey, or even going, whoa, blah, blah, blah. Even with just that touch, I feel like it would have had a lot more personality. But as it stands, it
sure.
feels very, very stilted and flat when they're just doing these like canned animations and there's no sound behind them.
Yeah, it does make me wonder sort of about the budget of the
Yeah,
game, which I
yeah,
don't think we know or we probably will never know. But I really would have liked to see this game be a higher
hmm,
priority,
yeah,
kind of in the way that Frontiers clearly
absolutely.
was. For Sega and Sonic Team, now obviously developed by RSS and everything, it's clear this was sort of more of a side project. But I just think that you're right, something had to change. I think the expectations of the price point maybe should have
Yeah,
changed,
definitely.
or even just continuing the quality of animation through to the
Sure.
cutscenes and sort of fleshing them
Yeah.
out in the zone transitions a little bit. I think would have been effective and kind of better sold this as a big Sonic game of
Hmm.
scope, a big 2D Sonic adventure. But the other thing for me that was a pretty clear signifier that I wasn't gonna really vibe with the game too much is the bosses.
Yeah.
Um, Sand Sanctuary is one that I know we
Yeah.
disagree on, but it's one that sort of highlights my
It's not a
issues with the
great
game.
boss. Just one I didn't have issues with.
Yeah, my problem with it is that this game opts for a much more traditional approach to boss
Yeah.
design, wherein
Traditional in
essentially you
comparison to
dodge.
other games and not necessarily Sonic games.
Right. Yeah, you dodge until the weak point appears, and you
Yeah.
hit the weak point, and you wait, and you dodge, and you hit the weak point. The tempo of that for me is not very
No.
satisfying, and this is one of my big issues I also have with Sonic
Hmm.
Rush, and it feels like it's kind of a continuation there in terms of the sort of amount of deliberation it feels like we have
Sure.
to go through to beat a
Hmm.
boss. Part of what makes, in my opinion, the Genesis and Mania bosses so interesting is that you really can wail on
Absolutely.
them, and it becomes a risk versus reward of,
If you're
do I
cocky
either want
enough,
to just,
you can get up in their
yeah,
grill and just kind of take him out in like a couple hits.
You can damage boost. You can lose your rings on purpose to get some hits in, try to recapture
Yeah.
them. There's a lot more, I think, sort of a dynamic
Hmm.
nature to the boss design in other Sonic games. Even if those bosses are of varying
Yes.
quality, I think that core concept, for me, is stronger and also a hallmark of
Yeah.
Sonic that I felt like was missing. So by the time I got to Sand Sanctuary, I was already starting to feel a lot of growing pains, but the bosses for me were definitely one of
Yeah.
them. Especially the very peculiar Fang chase
Yeah.
sequences.
Yeah. That the bosses are a big issue with this game, and I think they're
Yeah,
across the board one of the issues I've heard the most people talk about, especially as you reach that second half of the game, and these issues are only
right.
magnified because for the first few zones, those final bosses are no different from most older Sonic
Yeah,
games.
they're all right.
They're fine. They're not particularly memorable, but they don't take too long. You can mostly use momentum on them. But as the game starts to become more concerned with introducing set pieces into its boss fights, that's where the issues really come in. There are a couple of Eggman fights where you have to platform up some things and then get to the top and hit him. And those aren't the worst boss fights in the game, but it is emblematic of where this game is more interested in creating spectacle between the hits. And having that be the
Yeah,
focus of the boss fights is testing your platforming precision in terms of actually jumping on platforms rather than dodging things and getting in hits when you can. The bosses are only vulnerable every once in a blue moon, and especially if you mess up hitting them, because usually they take 4 or 5 hits. But if you accidentally miss once, and then if you accidentally get hit right before you needed to do a hit another time, suddenly that's 6 or 7 or more things, and you have to wait
yeah,
for this whole phase to go through cycle of animation and platforming and dodging obstacles and enemies being spawned to get any progress in. And it makes
yeah,
them feel slow and repetitious, which is kind of the opposite of what you really are looking for out of Sonic, which is that frictionless fluidity. And these are the worst examples of Sonic really just putting up constant roadblocks. Like, okay, I I couldn't hit the boss right now, but they are not susceptible to damage at this point. And so I gotta do a bunch of horse shit.
yeah,
They're in the background or they're at the top of the thing, and I gotta get up to them and then do it. It's, and that I think is nowhere more apparent than the Fang, like almost shmup level where you're like dodging stuff in the air.
yeah. And Golden
Yes,
Capital
at the end of
Zone.
Golden Capital Zone, which is already not a great zone. Um, and then you get that, and it's also long. That boss, that fight is so fucking long, and especially because you have to restart
Yeah,
the entire fucking thing if you die. And his attack patterns when you actually finally God are fighting Fang aren't like they're not the most obvious at the beginning. So there's a little bit of trial and error of what can hit me, what can I dodge, and so I ended up dying like 2 or 3 times, and that means that boss fight's taking like 30 minutes, as opposed to the best Sonic boss fights, which continue your momentum and are over in just a handful of minutes. You feel like you have the upper hand, and then you can move on to the next thing. This was a huge roadblock, and the final boss is another very specific example of that because there's like a whole section, and then you fight Eggman, and but then you have to walk all the way around him, and then while you're dodging missiles, and then you hit a thing, it's a whole. And he's got like 7 health.
yeah,
It the health bars on these bosses are inflated. The attack timing is really minuscule, and the amount of time between those minuscule attack timings is huge. So the bosses are a really massive issue with this game, and they're also
yeah.
the
I agree.
part that is, as you were alluding to, not that great from the start.
Yeah, and I just feel like the only other thing I even have to say about the game, really beyond that, is just that the level design gimmicks, and I feel like we're belaboring this point, are just not very
No.
effective. I mean, I think Cyber Station is a phenomenal example of this and kind of why I
Yeah.
tapped out. There's this part where you become a
Yeah.
mouse.
For why? For who? I don't know.
You become a mouse, like a big pixel mouse. By the way, I can't believe we're doing a voxel level in
Yeah, it's
2023, but that's
bizarre.
really neither here nor there. But you become a mouse, and you have to, like, one of those puzzles where you just start it's like a lattice of like different paths to take, and you just have to kind of guess. But what's weird about this is that there's enemies around the lattice that you have to
Hmm.
avoid. But as soon as you push in a direction to make your mouse go, you can't. You're committed.
You
You
can't
can't
stop until
back
there's
up.
another intersection.
Right, and even when you reach an intersection, you can't double back from where you
Hmm.
came from. You have to make a new
Yeah.
decision. But the problem is because you're going up and the enemies are coming down, I found myself often making a decision that seemed clear only to run into an enemy I couldn't
Yes.
see, and the game wrestling control for me to where I couldn't double
Yeah.
back. I couldn't make like a reflex decision. Oh shit, there it is. I gotta back up. Gotta try something
Yeah.
different. You're just
Well,
fucked, and then you have to follow the way down. It's very strange, and I think it's emblematic of how this game chooses
yeah.
concepts that seem interesting, and then instead of really iterating on them to tease out maybe where they fall short, they're just implemented with
Yeah. One time.
what seems like from the player's perspective not a lot of development of the
Yeah.
idea.
No, I would agree with that, and especially because that section is required. It's not like, oh, you went on the wrong
Right.
path and you ended up in this, and so you gotta find your way through it and like kind of get out of the rut. It is required to go
Yeah.
through, and also it is incredibly trial and error, not only because of the reason that you were mentioning, but because you can't see the top and you're never given a full idea of what this lattice looks like. Maybe like there's like maybe a pan over at the very beginning, but I don't even remember that.
Yeah.
It's not enough to like really matter. You can trial and error your way into going all the way up to the top, and you didn't choose the right fucking path, so you gotta go all the way back down and try again and make sure
Right.
that you get to the 1 out of 4 endings, I believe, that actually takes you to the rest of the level. And a perfect example of just implementing something that frankly doesn't belong in a Sonic game. I mean, already that stops your momentum just by the design of needing to go on these specific paths. But it is the worst of trial and error and not paying off and not rewarding your clever puzzle solving or understanding of the momentum of the physics. All of that is stripped away in that specific section. And there's not a ton that are exactly like that. I think that's probably the worst offender in the game. But the game does consistently throw level mechanics at you. And I think another very specific example of that is in Golden Capital and also Pinball Carnival, these pinball sections where you have to do like pinball platforming between bumpers and and you lose all control as soon as you hit a bumper. Basically, you start moving so quickly, it's really hard to reorient yourself, and you have to make it through these like bounce off the wall and then go through the gap to get to the next thing. Because if you don't, you're gonna hit the bumper, go boom, 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 and then you're all fucked up and you have to try again. There's so much trial and error of that the physics don't exactly work in your favor, and you just kind of have to fight them
Yeah.
until by chance you finally get through the one fucking hole. That is my least favorite part of Sonic games. And there are 2 zones in this game where they throw so much of that at you that to me it just feels like one big throw my hands up and pray and hope that I get to the level.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you raised the example of Pinball Carnival because I think this speaks to, I'm glad I didn't forget to mention this. What is maybe my biggest issue
Okay.
with the game? Um, Sonic Superstars was built in part on a very compelling concept. This will be a Sonic game of only original Sonic
Yeah.
zones.
We're already questionable
that-
with Bridge Island.
Well, here's the thing, Tucker. Bridge Island is not a location that has ever been
True.
seen before. Bridge
Yes.
Island.
And that's what a new
Pinball
that
Carnival.
is what a new Sonic stage is. A new zone.
And this is my issue.
Jungle zone,
I-
ice zone, sand zone, carnival zone.
I think it's quite frustrating because.
And would you believe it, Abram? I know you didn't see it. Would you believe there's like an Eggman final stage
Yeah.
at the very
I
end?
would believe it. I think it's frustrating to me for 2 distinct
Yeah.
reasons. The first is that in Sonic Mania, even though Sonic Mania is a lot of just literally
Yeah.
reused zones.
I think it's like 2/3
When you
reused
look at-
zones.
Yeah. But when you look at Studiopolis, when you look at Mirage
2 of the
Saloon,
best Sonic stages ever.
they're really great. And they present motifs and ideas that even if, okay, we're in a desert, the idea of being in this saloon and the big guns that fire you around and everything that stage does and everything that Studiopolis does really does present something fresh for you to explore as Sonic. And this game, in my opinion, unless those last two zones that I tapped out before have that, the game is devoid of that level of
Yeah.
creativity on a sort of level theming
Hmm.
perspective. But I'm also not even asking necessarily for every zone to reinvent the wheel like
Hmm.
those do, because as we just saw with Mario Wonder, which we'll be talking about soon, the themes are very standard, but what's done with the themes is very unique to the point where they don't feel familiar at all. And I actually think that there is a really good example of Sonic Superstars
Sure.
doing that, and that is in Sand
Sure.
Sanctuary when you're platforming across the
Oh,
huge
that's so
snakes.
fun. That's one of the best parts of the game. And in
I
the
think it's
background,
really
you see this
fun,
big
and
goofy snake like diving around. I'm like, hey.
yeah, it's really great. It sort of invites a sense of scale and a sense of
Hmm.
spectacle that does feel very
Yeah.
new and does contextualize a very familiar zone concept in a fresh
Yeah.
way and in a way that feels very
Hmm.
modern and feels very of the time. So I just think that even within Sonic Superstars, at the game that we
Yeah.
got, there are examples that you can pull from of really trying something that is provocative or just really interesting in terms of its spectacle. But I just think that those are so few and
They
far
really
between.
are.
I just simply do not feel like sort of reusing the gambling pinball motifs under a different name and a different color
Hmm.
palette with some different enemies really satisfies my desire or the promise of a game of new Sonic
Yeah.
locations. I
No,
just
definitely.
don't think that this game does
Yeah.
that,
No, I
unfortunately.
absolutely agree. I think that problem only becomes more prevalent as you go on because you get to Eggman stage at the end, or believe it or not, there's a shmup stage right before that, which happens in a lot of Sonic games, or there's an ice stage before that, which is just an ice stage with. Actually, the spin on that is that there, I believe it. Wait, hold on. Might be getting this mixed up with Mario. I played these two games very back to back. Obviously, they came
I'll
out.
let you know.
That snow keeps piling up. Is that Mario thing? No, there's not snow
No.
levels in Mario Wonder. There might be. Fuck, I don't know.
That's also not true. But that
Okay,
concept
sorry,
is
my
mostly a
bad.
Sonic concept.
So snow keeps piling up, and it like creates sort of pathways and you have to like kind of dig through it. That's a reasonably interesting idea, but aesthetically, it's just another snow level. But I think the reason that I don't have a huge issue with that on the whole of the game, is that I found the moment to moment like platforming level gimmicks in the first half of the game to be really engaging. As I said, it
Yeah, that's
becomes
fair.
more egregious as it goes on, and I think the the level gimmicks become frustrating rather than kind of interesting. But I think to the snakes, as you were talking about, which are these conveyor belts that are wavy that push you backwards, and it's like, okay, this is a snake and it's moving, it's tunneling through the thing. That's why this is a unique element to this level. It's kind of fun in that way. Or especially in Speed Jungle, I think is a second level. There are these. This is something that's happened in other Sonic games, but I like how they use it here. They're like these vines that you grab onto that like fling you up. I'm like, hey, that's kind of fun to
Yeah.
platform around on. And also there are like these harpoon guns that you step on and they shoot out a harpoon, and then you have a new pathway to go on. I'm like, I'm enjoying
Right.
engaging with these level mechanics, and they are doing something interesting with the precision or speed platforming. And I found those to be pretty fun. But those also decrease as time goes on, and when you get to the Eggman level, and the gimmick of that level is you got to do the stage twice because Act One is going through the level, and Act Two is doing backwards. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? Fucking kidding me with this one? It is again inconsistency is the key here, and frankly, for my taste, and where I really want to leave this off, the reason why I think this is a poor game on the whole isn't because there aren't times that I had fun, or isn't because there weren't levels or gimmicks or momentum that were on parity with the other fun that I had in Sonic games, but because the game drops off in quality so precipitously once you reach the halfway point that not only is it less zones that you're spending time in, because they're taking longer, but it's still half of the game gameplay wise, but they are just less fun. They're less unique. They're more frustrating. The boss fights take longer, and it leaves a really sour note in your mouth as you're finishing this game. You're like, okay, I fought my way through that. I didn't smoothly breeze through this game and really enjoy the momentum and was able to reach the end because my skill level was up there. It's no, I had to like battle this game's mechanics and level design tooth and nail to pop out the other side, frustratingly
Right.
so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that much more to add. I think that's a really great summation of where the game falls short, and I think that ultimately the greatest disappointment for me is that this was just a really good opportunity to push Sonic forward
Hmm.
in the 2D
Yeah.
space in the same way that Frontiers did for Sonic
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
3D
Yeah.
space. And it wasn't really
No.
that. I would really love to see another game that is not so concerned with classic Sonic
Hmm.
canon or anything, and that is just interested in taking a modern depiction of Sonic and a modern set of mechanics and seeing what you can do
Hmm.
with it. Because again, Dimps did a really great job with that in Sonic Advance and carried that formula a long way. With, in my opinion, mixed
Hmm.
results along the path, but and sort of resulted in some interesting styles of Sonic that were new and not Genesis, but
Yeah.
evocative of it. So I'm not necessarily one of those I wish we got Mania 2
Hmm.
people.
Well, that
I'm
would have
more
been the
I
better
wonder
game.
why we it would have been, but I think that for as much as I love
Yeah.
Mania, I think that a second Mania would have maybe been a little long in the
Mm.
tooth because I think that Mania as a compilation idea is really great and it is one of my favorite games of all time, but it was not it was a
Yeah.
refinement. It was not a
Yeah.
revolution really outside of the couple zones that are new and extremely effective. Sonic Mania is the best Sonic's ever been, but I want to kind of know how good Sonic can be,
Absolutely.
and I kind of was hoping that
Yeah.
Superstars would showcase that, and it
Yeah.
doesn't. Um, so I'm hoping that whenever we do get another full price Sonic
Yeah.
2D game, which I hope we do, I hope that this sells well enough, and the critical response, as far as Sonic goes, is good enough. So I'm hoping that we're in a context where they try
Yeah.
again, maybe with a different dev team, maybe with a different set of
Yeah.
ideas, and we just get something a little bit stronger than
Yeah.
this.
There's one more thing that we really need to talk about, and is what are this game's ideas that do new things for the Sonic formula, but I
Yeah,
think across the board all fail and are actually some of the worst aspects of this game, which is number one, 4-player multiplayer, or 1 to 4 player multiplayer.
yeah.
Terrible. uh, Absolutely fucking broken to play this game
Did you play it? I
with
didn't
four
play it.
people. Joe, Sam, Tanner by my side. We played 2
Interesting.
stages, and they were whining the entire time, and they were like, "No, we're not doing this anymore." And we turned off the game and did something
Yeah,
else because, if you can believe it, when you have the camera following one person and you're speeding through a level, people are left behind. They're like respawned every once in a while. It's kind of inconsistent. It tanks the frame rate. It makes the combat like basically impossible. And because you all
yeah,
work from the like, you work on this like live system where you can only like respawn a certain amount of times, and so if you get knocked off the stage or like someone moves on, sometimes it respawns you and doesn't use life, and sometimes it doesn't. And it's just like, what the fuck's going on here? It's really broken, and it makes the game very difficult to play. Even in those opening levels that are pretty smooth, you can't engage in the momentum when there are 4 people at slightly different points in the level, and also the camera like randomly chooses who to follow. So sometimes it'll just switch, and if someone's going off another path, it'll be like, too bad, bye bye, and it'll follow them. It's like, what the
yeah,
fuck is going on there? And that is an idea like what New Super Mario Bros. Wii did for 2D Mario. Synchronous 2D multiplayer is not a bad idea, and is something that does add to Sonic and makes this game a step forward in terms of trying something new. But it is categorically a negative on this game. It is not fun. It is basically unplayable, and it makes the level design, what appreciation I did have for it, fly out the window because I'm too busy being frustrated with the design of the game.
yeah.
What are you looking up?
The screen moves. Yeah, right. So Sonic Mania had co-op, and obviously there's like a race mode in Sonic
Mm-hmm.
2 where it like does
Split
this weird
screen, yeah.
split screen
Like hot
thing.
dog split screen.
So yeah, so they've always tried. I mean, I don't really I don't really know why they
Yeah.
bothered ultimately, or why they didn't just make it an online or
Yep.
LAN
Yep.
type
I think
experience.
that would have been a lot
I,
better.
I think that the reality is you probably could have scaled this for 2-player split screen and then 4-player LAN
Yep.
or online, and it would have been
Mm-hmm.
better. I think it just speaks to the fact that and although I don't know if we know this, I sort of get the sense that this game could have benefited from more development time pretty
Yeah,
clearly.
yeah,
So I just think that these ideas, they just could have been fleshed out
yeah.
more. But
And the other ones, there are two other things that are the new ideas that this game has, and then they don't do anything with it and are worse. The game is worse because of them. The online is this battle mode where you create a Metal Sonic character and you are thrown into these online matches, most of the time filled with bots
yeah,
because the online like matchmaking is really, really bad. Uh, and there's like 3 stages. And they want you to like climb up this leaderboard and get like go from like C to S rank or whatever, but there's no there's no variety. There's no real reason to play. It doesn't play into the strengths of Sonic's gameplay with the physics and momentum. So that's pretty poor. And that is what those medals are for. I know you're probably fucking wondering is to buy new
yeah,
customizable
cosmetics. Yeah,
things for your robot Sonic character. But it's just a poorly implemented online that is choppy and has bad matchmaking and doesn't play into Sonic. And it makes
yeah,
the game worse having that in there. And the final thing is these fucking Chaos Emerald powers, which are so poorly implemented in the game that they are either basically useless or they're really overpowered in a way that makes you question the design of some of the levels and some of the bosses. It's just really, really weird. It's not a bad idea to get a new power from a Chaos Emerald, but not
yeah.
including them in the game's level design or having them be combat ones that just make combat a breeze and basically brain dead. They're a sink on this game's design because it's very clear that not a lot of thought or effort was put into actually implementing this idea into the scope and concept of this game on a broader scale.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it is a really good idea because usually when I play Sonic, I just don't really care
Yeah,
to click
same here.
Chaos Emeralds. I never do. No matter how many times I replay Mania, it's never a draw for me. It's never a draw when I play Genesis games. Never a draw in any of the titles. It doesn't do it for me. But when you tie it to some sort of gameplay purpose, I think it's quite
Yeah.
effective. Ultimately, I don't know if I don't know really where along the development pipeline the idea went
Yeah.
wrong. But I just think that a good signifier of the fact that they could have probably used a rethink is the fact that there are some that you'll use against a boss that are hyper strong, and then they'll literally be like X'd out, and you
Yeah.
can't reuse them in the sake of that fight. And to me, that's sort of an indication of the fact that the balancing wasn't quite figured out, and there's a potential that these systems were almost developed separately from the level
Mm-hmm.
design, to where there had to be some kind of arbitrary decisions
Yeah.
made to not have one upset the other. So again, I think you're right in that this could go
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. This just wasn't the right application of it. And ultimately, that's all I have to say about Sonic
Yeah.
Superstars. I think that with refinement, this could have been a very successful Sonic title. And that's why I really hope that these ideas are taken, the best
Yeah.
ideas here are taken out on like a fundamental conceptual level,
Absolutely.
not put into a Sonic Superstars 2, but again put into a different context that looks a little different, feels as good as this
Mm-hmm.
does to play in its best moments, and then
This is
adopt
a very
some
specific
ideas.
puzzle you're creating here. Okay, if you do this, but not this, but then a little bit of this. Of course, that is what
Yeah,
we're hoping for. Is this game has some good, but I think it has a lot of bad that made this a frustrating experience for me to play through. Especially, I think,
yeah,
because I was really hopeful with those first few stages of the game. I was enjoying them, and maybe that's just the amount of time that I've put into playing the many 2D Sonic games that I've had. Maybe I'm finally starting to like grab onto it and enjoy that momentum and exploration. But the game rips that enjoyment away from you as a player because of the poor gimmicks and poor level design that
yeah,
has in the last part of the game. But for me, it was just ripping away like my potential excitement. I was like, hold on, I might really enjoy a Sonic game if this momentum keeps up and I keep
yeah.
enjoying the levels. But halfway through and spending, like 30 minutes on a level where I was spending 6 minutes on the other ones, it's like, man, you really like gave me a hot dog and then punched me in the nuts, and then I forgot about the hot dog because I got punched in the nuts.
Sure.
A chili cheese
Could
dog,
have said
actually.
chili dog. You could have said chili
I
dog,
was
but
formulating the
yeah,
I was formulating the expression as I was going.
that's fair enough.
Oh god.
Tucker, I have nothing else to say.
Sonic, do better next time. ways to solve that issue. Number one,
Yeah.
get a black spot in your armpit. Or you could always wear that shirt, but always wear another shirt over it. So you have the satisfaction of knowing you're wearing the shirt,
Right.
but people can't see your armpit hole. Or hear me out. You have a hole in your armpit, whole shirt, armpit shirt hole.
Right.
Constantly keep that whole sized scab festering in your armpit.
What if I went to some sort of clothier?
Clothier! Whoa! A tailor? What if you went to a tailor and you're like, can you fix my Sonic shirt?
How much do they charge?
To do that,
Hey penny?
a haw penny? Is it hay penny or a haw penny? I thought it was a haw penny.
Well, when I was
it's
I learned
halfpenny. We were both wrong.
You know the Three Little Rabbits in a Peanut Shell song?
No, that sounds like something you just came up with. How does it go?
Three little rabbits in a peanut
In the
shell.
peanut shell? How
Yeah.
fucking small are
One
they? The size of a
can
third of a
sing,
peanut?
One can dance. One can sew a pair of pants. But there was like a little emotion along with it. So it'd be like, three little rabbits in a peanut shell. One can sing, one can dance, one can sew a pair of pants. But the way that it would go is then you would go again. You'd go, three little rabbits in a peanut shell. One can sing, one can dance, one can sew a pair of... Three little rabbits in a... You know, it'd keep going. You'd remove a word every time.
Abram, this sounds like a lie. Why would you do that?
No?
What's the point of removing the thing? Like, what does removing the last word have to do with...
Well, you would keep... What I'm saying is you would keep removing the words until you weren't singing anymore.
This is like 99 Bottles of Pop on the Wall, but worse.
Tucker, this is obvious.
This is obvious, I see. Oh, my bad. I didn't do it that way.
Let me close my tab about the chase. Felix meets Felicity and like three little rabbits in a peanut. I'm finding Peanut Factory. Here it is.
Here it is!
Three little peanuts from bussongs.com.
Three little peanuts, not rabbits.
No, but the song is called Three Little Peanuts.
In a rabbit shell?
But no, this one's fucked up.
No, I'm not wrong.
Bus songs under alternative lyrics and related songs says there are
Who's the artist?
Rabbits in the Wait, this is
what
not
label
right.
were they a part of?
There are rabbits in a peanut shell. I know something I won't tell. Three little rabbits in a peanut shell. One can sing, one can dance, one can sew a pair of pants.
What did you think it was?
Just three little rabbits in a peanut shell. I'm trying to share the information. I'm not trying to hide it.
That's a great point. My bad.
It sounds like whoever wrote the alternate lyrics for bussongs.com would have to be waterboarded to reveal that they're still rabbits in a peanut shell. All right, you ready to talk about Sonic?
Yeah.